What's going on, humans of Earth, and welcome back to Neverlag for yet another episode of what are we calling this month in gaming? But this is August about July is why we're here, as prophesied, as foretold each and every month, and late
Two
as
weeks
foretold.
into the
Right?
month, as
Exactly, right on time in the middle of the month. We talk about what is it? What would that be? 70, 80 days ago, and try to remember.
That's right.
Anyways, welcome in. I'm one of your hosts, Levi, joined by the man who fell in the pit, Zach, over there. Zach, how you doing, man? Are you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning?
I am overslept through 5 alarms, which is always a sign of a well-adjusted and healthy life. It's been a bit of a stressful week. I've had some house repairs. Work's been a little crazy. The state of Colorado has been on fire, and I've never been better. So, how are you doing?
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Same. Crazy week. Crazy couple of weeks. Speaking of it being on fire, we happen to be pretty close to that. So
That's true. That's much more impactful.
trying to do
than
all of the life things, and then we also had to evacuate. We weren't in an evacuation zone, but we had to evacuate because we couldn't be around in case it moved to us. So
Yeah.
that was a crazy week. So anyways,
This month was almost live from the fire.
Oh yeah, this month was almost my widescreen monitor and computer set up in an alleyway, maybe somewhere,
Yeah.
It's
good it didn't come.
We're here. Yeah, we're here. The house stands, and it's nice to just sit down and reflect on the month it was in July. So, what do you think the term bright-eyed and bushy-tailed? What does that even mean? Where'd that come from? We talking about squirrel?
Yeah, or like Bugs Bunny or something, like bushy-tailed.
What is
like
referencing?
Adorable animal critter. I don't know. That sounds like a cartoon.
Because they're so energetic and they're up early and they're running around. I don't know.
Yeah, I think of like those old cartoons where it's like the cute animals with the overly big eyes, and I don't
know. We ask questions. We don't have the answers here.
That's right.
So, let's talk about some July here. Let's talk about July. And honestly, do you want to just start with Shadow of the Erdtree, because we have both completed it finally, and I feel like that's going to be our bread and butter. You want to start with it?
Let's do it. Let's jump into it.
Let's do it.
Shadow of the Erdtree. So we've both since finished it. We both finished it this past week, I believe. Right?
Yeah, very close actually. You made great time. We thought you were going to be doing this in default.
I made use of some summons for the last boss to get me there, but we did. And hey, it's good we're late, because if we had been right on time, we wouldn't have been finished with Erdtree. So now we can talk about that. It was an odyssey, and I really liked Elden Ring. It was my first FromSoft game that I actually played through, and so I think I had better memories of it than you, but it was interesting to go back because, I think one of the things we'll talk about is like you have to replay most of the base game of Elden Ring. Like, even if you mainline it, you have to do a lot of the core.
If you're not in the right spot with your playthrough, yeah.
Yeah, if you hadn't finished it and you have like your your save file or a New Game Plus ready to go, and even with New Game Plus, you'd still have to like go do certain story beats. And then I played Elden Ring on my PC back in the days when my PC worked, and it doesn't. RIP. It doesn't currently work, so I had to replay Elden Ring on PS5. So I was starting from scratch. So I had to go through everything. And it was interesting playing that experience, having now played
Did you have to go through everything, or did you have the privilege of going through everything?
I had the privilege, a little bit of both, I think. No, it was good because I wanted to get the platinum, and I loved Elden Ring enough that I was excited to replay it. And it had been just long enough that I was like, I'm excited to see some of these places again, like Crumbling Farm, Missoula. There's all these places I want to go again. Now that I've, it's been a while, but I beat Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro. Like, I've beat a lot of the other FromSoft games since then. And so I wanted to see how I felt about the experience. And we can kind of get into that, but it was fun to replay it. There are a few things about the base game that I think hold it back a little bit, but it's still an incredible game. And then of course, finally got into the DLC, and, I think the DLC was somehow way better. Like, we all expected it to be better, but I think the DLC really improved a lot of the core problems that the base game had, and elevated certain things about it as well. And it was a magical experience. Like, I don't know where it's going to fall in my FromSoft ranking exactly, but I think it's going to be a toss up between Erdtree and Dark Souls 3. So it was amazing. I loved it. We can get into the details, but like, what are your high level thoughts of having played Erdtree?
Yeah, you stole stole a lot of um my lines there, but
Good, good.
yeah, I mean, so I got nothing. No, FromSoft, they we know that they
That's it,
usually come
folks.
out. Yeah, that's it for August about July. Thanks for um we know that FromSoft are they usually kill it with their DLCs. It's usually somehow better than the base game. I really wasn't sure what to expect with this, to be honest, with Elden Ring. It being an open world, I was really curious like how they were going to handle that, and we ended up finding out it's just its own open world, basically a different map, completely separate. But I'm honestly blown away. I I didn't have a lot of hype for this, honestly, because as is documented here on the channel, I have a lot of issues with base game Elden Ring. Um, I think it took what it gave us was great with some of the, the horse, the open world, the huge vistas. Really, the horse in the open world, I think, is just really what Elden Ring did that was special beyond other games. Um, and I'll get to this in the DLC a little bit, but fighting dragons on horseback, no game has done what Elden Ring has done with that. It is an achievement. But other than that, I think most everything else for me was a step back from like a Dark Souls 3, in terms of combat, in terms of boss design, um, and just game design. I think open world, and I even have this will be my sole critique, but adding an open world makes it harder to know what the intended experience for a boss fight is. And then you factor in spirit, summon ashes, things like that. It just got really convoluted for me, and some of the boss fights felt kind of insane because of the amount of tools that they'd handed us in this game and not really knowing maybe what power level you were bringing. So, anyways, these are all my issues, and I just kind of came into Erdtree, um, like, oh yeah, I'm excited. I'm sure it'll be fun because I still enjoyed Elden Ring. I didn't dislike it, but it just wasn't on the same tier for me. And man, I gotta say, after like a month playing Shadow of the Erdtree pretty regularly, I mean, I've got to be between. I'm well. I'm between 60 and 100 hours in this DLC. I took my time. I played it a lot, and it is. I think they, like you said, I think they have corrected so many issues from the base game, um, that this almost feels like when I came into Elden Ring, I think I was really um, thinking, oh, this is going to be Dark Souls 3 open world. Just at a glance, that's what we're getting. Cool. But it ultimately didn't work out that way. Game design is how I felt. This DLC to me feels like, okay, that maybe this is a lot closer to Dark Souls 3 open world. Like it kind of felt like that. The boss design felt tighter, a little less insane to me. And I know some people will get into the final boss, but I don't think any boss in this DLC was as badly designed as Millennia was. Um, so, anyways, we can break it down. I thought this was amazing. I thought this was a 10 out of 10 experience. I thought it was better than Elden Ring. I know there's mixed opinions on that, but the size of this thing is insane. And
Yeah.
honestly, I wish that this is plenty. Like make games this size or even a little smaller. Like let's do that instead of um I don't even know that I feel that it's smaller than base game Elden Ring, but square footage wise it is. And I guess that's kind of part of what they did better. I feel like they use their space more efficiently. So let's I'm getting into a million things here. Is there some aspect of the DLC you want to target first and discuss?
Yeah, let's start with the map design, the level design. I think that's a good place to go into it because I agree with you. I think you look at Elden Ring and the base game, and one of the things that was so cool in the moment when you first started that game is like there was a map first of all, which sounds ridiculous. It sounds like an iPhone user. I have this feature that everyone's had, but the Dark Souls games historically have not had
USB C.
maps. Yeah, exactly.
Have you guys heard of it?
I have this cool new feature. Android users are like, I've had that for 10 years. Um, but you know the previous FromSoft games didn't have maps. This one did, and it was kind of necessary because the previous games are linear. They're different. They're not needed in the same way. For the open world, the exploration, you kind of need it. But one of the things that was really cool, like Elden Ring has one of the best maps in terms of just like the
Yeah,
way it lets you
a
experience the
brand new
world.
design for maps that we didn't know we needed, and I hope more games do, because the
Same.
expansion. And for those who don't know, unlike most games where you pop into the game and the map is there and it's like, oh, I have this little section and I know the map is this big. Elden Ring gives you the map of your starting area as a full screen. So it just looks like this is the map. And
Mhm.
as you explore further and further out and find a new map fragment, the map starts to zoom out. And so at
Yeah,
no point during the game until like the end do you really know how big the world is. And that's just such a cool way to do a map. I
it
mean,
was so cool.
yeah.
It played with your expectations, um, and it helped that it was also big. Like you kept finding places, and then it did
And
other
it
things
felt
to
like exploration. It felt like organic exploration. You
it
don't when
did,
you're exploring, you don't know how big the map is,
right? Yeah.
until you find more of the map. Like,
It did something else cool too, is that, I remember playing the base game and you found multiple locations. You find Kaled on accident and you're like, I got to get out of here, but the map zooms out a little. And then you find, you get to Liurnia or whatever, and it starts to zoom out more and more. But then you go like underground and you're not on a new zoomed out section of the map, but all of a sudden you're in it like a parallel continent of the above ground. And so it did all these things where it's like, this is so cool. The exploration's so interesting. The map design's so good. But there were some problems too, and I think they became more apparent as you played the base game. And the first of those being like some of that exploration wasn't it, rewarding always, and that's fine. Like not literally everything can always have a reward, but I feel like there was some open space that wasn't really utilized, and so sometimes you'd be exploring, you're like, what am I doing? There's not really much here, and it kind of felt like a shame sometimes that you would like explore to one end of the map and there wouldn't really be anything for it, wouldn't really go anywhere, and you'd have to kind of backtrack. And then I think
I
the
think
other
you've been
issue
living in my echo chamber too long.
I just imbibe texts from Levi about the game, and then I eloquently restate them on
Yeah.
live on air.
Take credit.
Um, no, well, the one other thing that I really have been feeling for a while is that, especially having replayed the game, is as you progress through the map, you get to the mountaintops of the giants or whatever. It's like the furthest. There's that, and there's the Tree, but those are the kind of the northern areas, and the mountaintops of the giants is this huge section of map. It's kind of like the equivalent of like Russia or Alaska on our map, where it's like as big as everything else, seemingly. But then when you go there in terms of gameplay and explorable areas, it's like not that big. Like it was feels like that's like 20% of the game in terms of what you actually play and explore, but it looks like 50%. And I think part of that is maybe just they ran out of time. Like, it's a huge game, and so it feels like they just didn't have time to pack it with as much stuff to do and
Yeah.
places to go as like the first areas. And so it felt like the illusion cracked a little bit for me. Like it was still amazing what they did, but the illusion cracked a little bit. And so I think going into Erdtree, something that's interesting is, like you said, even though the square footage is technically a little bit less, it's still big, but square footage is a little bit less. But the way they utilized the spaces and interconnected them made it so much more interesting and satisfying while still giving you that exploratory feel. So I don't know if you want to jump off that point, but
100%. Yeah. Let me say everything you just said again. No, yeah, you kind of, and you reminded me too, actually. That was a good point about the later stages of Elden Ring, the snowy mountain area. It really does feel like with Elden Ring, they almost had like a square footage in mind for the map, and they made this giant map and then they filled it, which I guess you have to do. That's kind of a dumb thing to say, but like what I'm saying is they didn't have a purpose and idea for every area is what it feels like, and they kind of maybe ran out of time or whatever, and a lot of areas I feel in the base game feel just kind of empty and not populated enough with events or things to find or enemies. And that becomes, like you said, more evident in certain areas, especially that later snowy area. I think the game would have benefited a lot from being maybe 60% of the size it was in square footage, and just tightening everything up a little bit. There's something to be said for like the majesty of looking out over a vista or whatever, in Liurnia, when you look out over the lakes and the giant castle, and like there is
mm-hmm.
something to be said for that, but I think it needed to be reined in. And man, did they ever. Yeah, I think Shadow of the Erdtree, uh, I think its map design is 10 times better than the base game. And I know some people have been frustrated by um, its the way it's interconnected, and like, oh, I want to get over here and I can't figure out how to get over here. But to me, that is literally FromSoft design. Like that is what they do so
That's part
well.
of what I liked about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I think you just got to explore and not be so worried about trying to get to point B. But the other thing I love, just to go back to their map design, because you said this is the first game we've gotten a map in. Um, and to me, that's almost counterintuitive to FromSoft's level design, because there are other games. Part of the charm is mentally mapping out areas and paths. And oh, did I go? I forgot to go down that path. And a map would take away from that drastically. But
Yeah.
I
Or,
think this
oh, I
is such.
unlocked this door and this is how I get to here or get
Yeah,
back to
yeah.
here. Yeah.
But I think they did such a good compromise here, because the map is needed and useful. It's good that it's there, but it is also not too useful. Like it doesn't tell you above, below. It's very much a looking over the top of the map. You can't really see what's underneath or how things connect. And I think that's such a good compromise for their design, because it does help you get a general sense of where you're at on the continent, on the island, whatever. But it does not hold your hand and tell you how to get from here to here. You're not constantly looking at the map. At least I'm not. So I think that's really great. But yeah, their design here. I mean, there's not a location in Shadow of the Erdtree that I disliked or felt bored by. I was just constantly engaged. I felt like everything was visually a tier above the base game. I mean, there's some Farm
Yeah.
Azula, and there's some really cool. I love Liurnia. I think it's one of my favorite places still. And then
Yeah.
you've
Lyrian
got
is great.
the underground
Nocron.
Noctis. Is that what it's called? I always forget. There's some really cool areas. Don't get me wrong, but I just felt like they took it up a notch in this DLC, and the variety, felt like there was more variety, more color palette. They're really starting to embrace color more than they have in their past games. Some of these vibrant areas with flowers and different things.
Yeah.
Um, Elevation is huge. I mean, they started to do it, obviously giving us a jump, giving us a horse that can double jump, which is crazy. They've obviously
Yeah. That
started
was
to
a good
mess with
move.
elevation in Elden Ring, but here it's just, again, turned up to 11. Like the amount of verticality on this map.
Yeah.
You look at the map and it's this big, but you have to factor in that it goes like three deep and three
And
above that.
if
Like,
you flip it on its side, it's like, I can't even,
yeah.
not even on my screen.
So
It's,
exactly, from the top of this mountain all the way to the bottom of this like cavern at the base of a waterfall. Like it just, I feel
yeah,
like you explore more vertically than you do horizontally, or on a
I agree. And
as flat as the map is.
it was so satisfying because it's cool. Like you start in the opening area, the gravesite plane, and then a little bit later you get to a point where you're up on one of the mountains, the kind of ring that valley, and you're like, oh, I'm on top of the world. I can see everything. It's so cool. I can see in all these directions. And then much later in the game, you're up on the even higher areas like the green kind of jungle area, or there's as you get to kind of the final areas and stuff, and you look out and you're like towering over those other areas that you were at, and you're like, oh my gosh. And one of my favorite things in open world experiences is kind of the I can see my house from here effect, where it's like you can see
Yeah.
where you started, you can see memorable places you've been, and there's something majestic about this location you were at that felt so grand being tiny on the map and reminding you how
Yep.
small you are. I mean, it's the same reason it's cool to like go see the Grand Canyon or anything else. And that experience in this game was cranked up like nothing else, and it felt better than it felt even in Elden Ring. I think because of like the sheer verticality and how interesting it was to like scale these different places. And I haven't felt this excited exploring an open world since Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and it's that same kind of effect. It's
Yeah.
like I know I can find a way to these places, like or like one of the first uh, like land masses that you can see is this giant mountain peak in the east. I think it is the eastern edge of the map, and you can see it from the get go because
Southeast.
it's
Yeah.
this towering southeast. Yeah, this towering mountain, and it looks so big but so far away. But eventually, it's like you can get to these places, and so it's just it's really cool. And also making use of your horse and the double jump, and they did such a good job connecting it all together. And I think some people might be frustrated with how it's not always immediately intuitive. Like, oh, I don't just walk from here to here and now I'm in the new spot. And on its face, that I can see that, but it's like if you give that up a little bit and you think, okay, I'm not just going to look at the map and think
But
I
that's
should be
boring.
able to. Yeah, it is like I should be able to go from here to here. It kind of forces you to have what you need, which is okay. Well, let's put my map away for now. I kind of have a general sense of the land. Let's put my map away and look at where does the land
Yeah.
lead me. And they're experts at level design. So when you follow the different ways they lead you, you'll end up going, under a cliff face and coming up above something else and ending up in a crevasse that leads you up to a different mountain. And you kind of follow the winds, and it feels a little chaotic at first, but the more you go through it, you start to realize how things are connecting and how you're getting to these different areas. And it's,
Yeah.
it's great.
And I should have. We were really bad at this. We got to get better. But this is going to be a spoiler episode, pretty much for any game we discuss. Erdtree's been out for quite a while, so we're going to talk in detail about any of this stuff. If you haven't played it or care, look away, listen away. Wait, no, that has a different meaning.
Yeah.
Run away.
Listen
So
away.
yeah, spoilers ahead. But
Mm.
what was I going to say? Oh yeah, if you give the player immediate satisfaction as to where they're going, or no, it's all on the map and it's clear, you can't surprise the player, and that's where so much joy comes from exploring this
Yeah.
world. That very mountain you were talking about, the Dragon Peaks, very, I mean, just epic looking. This most jagged, precipitous mountain in the southeast quadrant of the island or whatever we're on. And you kind of know you're not supposed to head there right away, but you kind of start peaking eventually down in that southeastern area and realize, oh, there's no way, nothing connects to this part of the map. I can't get there yet. So like you said, you just kind of go, oh, all right, let me see where I can go. And eventually the awesome surprise is that you go into a dungeon, which this is another huge upgrade over the base game. So many of the dungeons were so bland in the base game. And here they're a little repetitive. You've basically got 3 flavors of dungeons in this DLC, but 3 flavors goes a long way. And I think each of
Yeah.
them were better. Even the ones that were similar to the base game, the very like stone, just basic looking dungeon, I feel like they elevated the mechanics within the dungeon or the layouts, or they did a much better job. But anyways, you go into this dungeon and you're just like, oh cool, this is a nice little, these have been, we know what these are, they're a nice little change of pace from the open world. Let me go in here and kind of navigate a more classic from soft level design, beat a boss, teleport out. You get to the end of the dungeon and there's a teleport out sign, or not sign, like little marker that you can teleport out of the dungeon. And I went over to click it and I almost clicked it, and then I was like, wait, those look
There's a
like big
door.
doors at the back of the cave. Sure enough, you walk over, open up the doors, and it leads to a tunnel through the mountain that opens to a huge skybox vista of the Dragon Peaks. And there you are.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize this dungeon was not just a dead end dungeon, it was literally a tunnel through the mountain. And that's just, there's so many moments like
It
that
made it
where,
feel so much more real too. Like, oh, this
yeah,
isn't just a
it's
random
just such a,
auto-generated dungeon.
yeah, it's such a joyful surprise to find, oh, this is how I get here. Oh,
Yeah, I had the same
just something
experience.
new.
I almost teleported out and I was like, okay. And I was like, wait a minute, those are doors. I was like, let me open those before I teleport. For some reason, I
Yeah.
thought it was just going to be like a little room or something. So I opened the doors and it's same thing as like, I've been wondering how to get here for
Hmm.
30 hours now. And here I
And they
am.
use that same trick again later, but it was just as cool. There's another dungeon
Yeah.
in kind of like the north, I would just say straight east, not quite northeast, but you do this
Hmm.
dungeon, you come to the end, and once again there, I don't know if it was doors or something, but oh no, what it is you enter the boss room, and the boss room is outside. You've been in a dungeon this whole time. You're prepared to go into like a cave or something, and you go into
Hmm.
the dungeon room, and you're outside in this creepy forest all of a sudden,
Yeah.
and you beat
Yeah.
the boss, and then you're in a new area like immediately. And that was a brand new thing too. You're like, oh, this is a whole new direction to go. This isn't a dead end once again.
Yeah.
I think also of the one of the castles, I think it was Shadowkeep. Um, minding my own business, exploring Shadowkeep, which is one of their more legacy dungeons. I think it's the second one in the DLC, where you
Hmm.
put your horse away, your classic FromSoft design again. And I get about halfway through Shadowkeep, and I find this ladder down kind of in this like dam area with waterfalls. I descend the ladder. I'm checking all the nooks and crannies, right? And I find I find an invisible, what are they called? An invisible wall. What's the term for them? I'm spacing.
The hidden wall
Yeah, the hidden walls,
that you have to hit and it
illusory,
disappears.
illusory
Illusory,
wall.
yeah.
And I find this illusory wall, and it leads further down and further down, and then I get in the coffin, which is from the base game, to
Mm-hmm.
basically float down the waterfall and access an entire new section of the map that I came about organically. But if you had missed that and you were looking at that section of the map kind of down like this almost ravine where the waterfall goes, you'd be like, how on earth do I get there? And it was just a super cool. This game does that all the time. It's so good at like, I'm doing this thing. It's the Breath of the Wild. Like you said, there are two games that have done open world perfectly, and they're both very different. But Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and Shadow of the Erdtree, I think, are 10 out of 10 examples of how to design an open world where you are doing something, you kind of do this little sidetrack thing, and then all of a sudden it turns into 2 hours somewhere else. And you're like, man, I got to
Yeah.
get back to Shadowkeep. I was in the middle of Shadowkeep.
I was in the
Here
middle.
I am
Yeah.
distracted 3 hours later. So,
I had the same experience. I figured out, like, I took the coffin on it and I was like, where am I like I'm supposed to be like going up Shadowkeep, but it's great.
yeah, their level design is impeccable. And I'm shocked at the leap that it feels. The world feels so much more compact in a good way. It feels like there's something everywhere. Um, Not a lot of wasted space really in this
Yeah.
DLC, and the jump
Well,
that they
still feeling
made
pretty
from,
big. Like, it's
yeah,
still a big.
while still offering vistas and places to run around, not feeling
Mhm.
cramped. Very impressive. A lot of that owing to verticality, I would say. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
they continue to push the boundaries of verticality, and it has me convinced that one of the core tenets of a good open world is verticality. The flatter your map is, the more bland and boring it is going to be to explore. And yeah, they just are proving that in this DLC. The jump that they've made from base game to DLC is exciting because I'm like, man, I'm actually genuinely excited to see what they do next now with this
Me
open
too.
world formula. Where after the base game, I was kind of like, man, I'll be there for it, but I really want them to also get back to making their classic games, which I still feel that way, but I'm more excited for this open world formula. So,
Yeah.
um,
And I kind of wonder if the verticality can, in some ways, influence even their linear type games. Like,
yeah, hopefully. I mean, I would
like there's
think that if we
probably a
get a Dark Souls 4 or something, we're going to have a jump, because
yeah,
Sekiro had a jump. Um,
yeah, and
I
just
think
the way
they've
the
moved on
levels are
past that.
designed and stacked.
Yeah.
Um, I think they've learned a lot, and it's. I don't think I've ever experienced like the verticality on any level near Elden Rings, Erdtree, and
No,
it's
besides
awesome.
Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah, Tears of the that's right, Tears of the
Different,
Kingdom.
different, but
It's
still a lot
different,
of
but
verticality.
there's still a lot there. But
Yeah, I would
yeah,
say no other open world has done it that way. So, yeah, level design, amazing. From
hmm
there, I would say we should go into bosses.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm good with that. hmm
Um, what's your overview? What's your thought on the boss list here in Shadow of the Erdtree?
Overall, love the boss lineup. I was gonna make a joke, but I don't. I love them all, except the final boss. I have a few qualms with, and I think we'll get to that. Um, so we can kind of save him for last. So I do have some issues with the very last boss, and I think that mostly comes down to what they were trying to do. I think they used some tools that didn't work quite as well, but everything other than the last boss was super fun. Um, the bosses felt like you. I think you said this earlier. Better tuned, better better set up so that they're difficult. And require but not impossible, like they're very fair. They require you to learn their move sets. I remember when I first found Mesmer, for example, at the end of Shadowkeep. Man, I was like, this guy's so unfair, he's the worst, he's so hard. But after playing for a while, I started to figure out his move sets and was like, okay, this is actually doable. Like, he's hard, but uh, I learned the dance, and he's one of my favorite fights from the game. And there was a lot of moments like that. They still offer you some of those tools that I think make balance harder than a game like Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne, even, where they're trying to account for all of the different types of builds and summons you might have. But they somehow did it a lot better, and I think um, I also like one other thing I'll say before I let you go is I really liked the theming of a lot of these bosses. So like just the aesthetics of some of these were really cool. And there were some cool aesthetic bosses. You know, you talk about Millennia being one of the like maybe the worst boss design uh, in FromSoft history. Um, I thought she was like cool in a lot of ways, but something about the bosses in this DLC are just so vibrant and cool and interesting. Um, and maybe we can highlight a few. I don't know, maybe we'll do like a tier ranking of the bosses for a separate video sometime. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
my overview. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that, just to speak to their visual design, I think these might be the best visual designs for bosses that FromSoft have done. Yeah, in any game. I Dark Souls 3 is always my benchmark for. I think Dark Souls 3 has the best. First of all, it has a million bosses, and
Yeah.
pretty much all of them are either really unique and interesting or really well designed. And I think it just is the peak of a boss list from Dark Souls 3. And I think that,
Hmm.
though this is obviously a lot shorter, being a DLC or whatever, um, I think it's on par at least with Dark Souls 3. And I think the designs here, I would say that the visual designs of most of these fights I think are better than most things in Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 has some really cool stuff, but it does kind of more heavily stick to the medieval knight type design for a lot of things.
Hmm.
Whereas this, I feel like we got, for the first time since Bloodborne, we've gotten quite a bit of Bloodborne crazy alien weird influence in these boss designs,
Yeah.
and I'm super here for it. Like, I'm looking down the list here. Shadow Sunflower, I think it's the Scadu Tree avatar, is what it's called.
Yeah.
Visually, that arena, that boss fight,
Hmm.
just top tier. I thought it was fun to fight mechanically. I
Yeah, that
thought
one was fun.
visually it was perfect. It was so weird and unexpected, but also
Yeah.
thematic because you're seeing these dried sunflowers everywhere at the base of the Erdtree.
Yeah.
Um, so good. I
Yeah.
love that boss fight. I think also of I don't know how you pronounce it because I don't know if I ever heard the name, but Metir, Mother of Fingers,
Oh
is what
yeah,
I
the
call
one
her.
it was underground, but it felt like you were under the ocean or whatever.
Yeah. Oh my
The
goodness. And I
yeah,
gotta say that quest line, I think that's probably one of the best quest lines FromSoft
that
has
was a
ever
great
done.
quest line. Yeah, that was
I mean,
probably my
just
favorite quest line in the DLC.
the visuals and the creepiness of the manor or the church that the guy is in, and kind of you're like, oh,
Mhm.
what is this guy's deal? Do I
Something
trust
seems
him?
off
And he
with
wants
this
you to go
guy.
find
Yeah.
these finger ruins. My only complaint about that quest line, and I guess it's not even a complaint, but just what would have made it chef's kiss cherry on top, is if those finger ruins had a unique, maybe mini boss in each of them. They did
That
feel, those finger
I yeah.
ruins felt a touch empty, and it kind of felt anticlimactic to just walk in and blow
Go
the
to the
horn.
bell. Yeah.
I would have liked a named boss fight there at each of those ruins. But
Me too.
apart from that, those finger ruins were like visually some of the coolest places on the entire map.
And very
Uh,
unsettling.
just just
Yeah.
weird, just so weird, but also epic looking. I mean, when I first
Yeah.
came to the southeastern one near the cerulean forest, and you see that overlook, and you just see
Hmm.
all these fingers coming out of the ground, it's like majestic and terrifying at the same time. It's so
Yeah.
weird.
I know my first
um
thought I was like, this is
so
so cool. It's
Bloodborne.
like I don't want to descend into this canyon of fingers. Like, ugh. Just- it
Yeah,
was
it is
it
so
was
cool.
really
And
good.
then to like finish that quest line and realize, I actually realized that there was an area under his little church area early. Because I came at night. Apparently at night he disappears from his little throne that he's sitting in. I forget his name. I should know it, but I don't. Um,
Kevin.
but Kevin, yeah, Kevin leaves at night because he's doing something else. I don't know. And so I went in there, and it's like, oh, inspect his chair. Interesting. The chair, you know, pushes aside and reveals a giant ladder that descends hundreds of feet into the ground and into one of the most epic looking areas, also with just like
Yeah.
this crazy ethereal finger island thing. I don't know, with another horn that you have to blow. And I come down the ladder and I'm like, let me go back up. I think I'm early. I think I'm early here. So I went back to the second finger ruin, finished up, came back, did the whole quest line. But man, to then descend that ladder, blow the horn, you're transported like underground, because I think you can see like the root of the fingers coming out of the ground is what it's supposed to
Hmm.
be. But you're right, it does feel very aquatic almost, or just like very Bloodborne. What's the
Yeah.
term that Bloodborne is? I can't remember.
Lovecraftian,
Lovecraftian. It just
cosmic.
kind of has that
Yeah.
vibe, and it was so perfect because the whole time during this quest, I was just like, dude, if we don't fight a crazy hand finger beast at the end of this, I'm gonna be pretty upset. And then
Yeah.
when you turn in the quest, I was like, dang, that was a bummer. And then you go fight Mother of Fingers, and um, just visually one of the coolest bosses ever, I think.
I loved that boss. The music in that boss you felt
Yeah, some of the
ethereal.
boss fight music was so good too.
Yeah, a lot of bosses had great music, but I loved the music in Mother of Fingers because it was just like this haunting but kind of beautiful and
Yeah,
almost upbeat. Like it was
yeah,
really
it
weird
was
but
good.
cool. It was a good fight.
So yeah, I mean, I'm
My only
just
other
to
complaint
briefly
about that quest line,
go
just
ahead.
one other thing real quick, is he has like this night lady working for him with the coolest armor set that you can get, and then she also has that black katana that like leaks darkness or whatever, and I
Right.
didn't realize how to get that from her, and so by the end, like I fought and killed her, and then it locked me out of getting her sword. So it's like kind of bummed about that, but that's from
Oh,
soft games
really?
for you. Yeah, you have
You
to do
fought and
something
killed her.
else at
Because I
the
fought her
end.
too. I think you might have just missed it. Because after you fight her, her body is still there in the church, and you can walk up to her and speak to her. And then you have an option to hand her, like, I forget what they're called, the good eye or the bad eye.
Oh,
And
I
one will
must have
give you the
missed it.
sword, and one will give you the armor.
I
Or
must have
no, one
missed
will
it.
give you her spirit ashes, and one will give you the sword. I don't know if you can get her
I
armor.
think it's
I'm
spirit.
unsure.
I think it's spirit ashes and sword because I believe I got her armor.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, classic ambiguous questline, but I do feel like that one was a little more directing than most, and it
the quest
benefited a lot from
overall.
it because you
Yeah,
knew where to go, you knew what to do, and it culminated in a really cool secret boss fight that you could
yeah.
easily miss. And it was awesome. I'm looking down my list here. I actually have Mesmer at 1. I think Mesmer is a perfect boss fight. He's about as perfect as it gets. He's up there with a Nameless King. Um,
Nameless King.
you
Nameless
know,
King's still my favorite, but Mesmer's really good.
not quite a Sekiro boss are just so perfect because of the nature of that game, but like it's just a top tier Dark Souls boss in my opinion. um
Yeah,
and
Mesmer
then
was good.
we'll talk about this, but I've actually got Promised Consort Radon at 2, despite some issues
Interesting.
that I have with it. And then next tier I talked about Shadow Sunflower, Mother of Fingers, Bale the Dread, probably the most epic boss fight that FromSoft have
Bale's up
ever
there for
done.
me.
Just like the
Bale's.
culmination of dragon fights
Yeah, I was gonna
on
say it's
top of this
maybe the best
peak.
dragon I've ever fought.
Yeah, just so epic. And then Midra, the madness. I thought that was a really well designed boss fight as well. Very
Yeah,
thematic, very cool. Um,
Ramina. I loved Ramina. She was not as hard as some of the other ones, but thematically,
is that the
she
Ramina, the Saint of the
she's the
Bud?
saint of the bud. Yeah.
So really quickly, I want to touch on this because I think this boss list is incredible. There is not a boss in this DLC that I disliked, honestly. Some I
Hmm.
liked more, obviously, but I think that this is just a fantastic, stellar boss list. I think that their moves on largely were fun to fight. They felt fair. They had good punish windows, most of them. My one complaint with the DLC, and I don't know how they fix it because I feel like it's an open world problem, is that it still is difficult to fight bosses at the right time at the right power level, and you don't know what that is because of the nature of open world. And
Hmm.
there were many boss fights. I actually got about halfway through the DLC and stopped using the Erdtree fragments because I think it was Commander Gaius I got to, and he was just pretty easy. Like I got him in like 2 or 3 tries, and I just didn't have to fully learn his move set. Ramina Saint of the Bud was another one of those,
Hmm.
and that's just a bummer because I feel like these bosses are so good. It's just a bummer to beat them so quickly that they don't leave an impression, and you don't really overcome a challenge so much
Yeah.
as you just know that they can't really. You have to be pretty lazy to die. So that sucks. I really wish there was a way to um, fix that issue and make it so that more bosses bring that perfect challenge that like a Mesmer did when I fought him. And
Yeah.
everyone's mileage is going to vary. Maybe you fought something earlier and it was way harder. That just is the nature. But it's a bummer to fight at something like Mother of Fingers was another one where it's like this boss is so cool, but by the time I fought her, it just wasn't that hard. I beat her in two or three
I took down
tries,
Mother of Fingers pretty easily as well for the
and
same
that's a
reason.
bummer because that fight is so cool. Just to not have that resistance and really have that learn that dance with a boss. it doesn't make the same impact. So
Yeah.
I don't know what the fix is. I was discussing this with my brother, and maybe you have bosses um, scale with you,
Mm-hmm.
but there's so many things that, like, to fix the open world problem, you kind of would harm something that people love about RPGs. For me personally, I don't care. I love Sekiro. Like, get rid of some of the RPG things. I'm good with it. Make it so that, like, in Sekiro, you kill a boss, you get a remembrance, you get more powerful. The next boss scales with you. Maybe have the open world enemies not scale, so you can feel that sense of power as you get stronger. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's my only critique with the DLC, to be honest. There were bosses here that I wish I had to fight a little bit harder.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Um, Man, even feeling overpowered in this game is pretty fun though. But uh, so Radon, let's talk about Radon. I agree with all the bosses; they're all cool. We could spend a lot of time waxing poetic on all of them, and maybe, like I said, we'll do a tier ranking at some point because it'd be fun to see where they all land. But let's talk about Radon because I liked Radon too. I thought he was cool, but um, my initial reaction, so I had it spoiled for me actually, which was kind of, I think you did too, but it was kind of a bummer that, like,
Vaguely, yeah.
I've been avoiding everything. Like on TikTok, I don't really watch gaming content. I mostly just watch like book related stuff. And so I thought I was safe, but like randomly a video comes up of a guy streaming himself fighting Radon. And I'm like, okay. And it's like, I can tell this is the final boss just based on everything about it. So I got it spoiled for me. And my initial reaction was like, okay, like we're getting like a repeat character from the base game. Like all these other bosses were these brand new things. And I was kind of hoping that the last boss would be something new. And I guess lore wise, it kind of is, but
It felt
um,
too similar, for
it
sure.
felt a little. I mean, I will say the fight is very different than the first time you fight Radon. It's incredibly
Right.
different. It's him in his prime. It's way more aggressive. His moveset
But
is
it's still Radon.
entirely different, but it is still a character we know. And so that's kind of one complaint. And I was even hoping at the end that like he was a penultimate boss and that like we'd beat him and then like Mikola would
Mikola would transform into some crazy thing. Yeah, for
and we'd
sure.
go to like the realm in between lights and dark and we would fight,
The
Mikola,
lands
soul of the
between the
light.
lands between.
Between the lands, between the
The
lands,
lands underneath between the lands between.
betwixt the lands between. I was hoping, yeah, we'd fight like
Uh,
Mikola, soul of light, or something cool and weird like that. And
Dragonheart.
and it didn't quite do that. And so I it was still the fight with Radon and the whole ending. It was very epic. So my complaint is pretty small, but I kind of had wished there was that added slice of like, even if it was the final phase was just Mikola or something different, that could have been kind of neat. So that's like the
Agreed, yeah.
probably my main critique. And then the other critique is just he's very hard, and I feel like some of his difficulty is a more on the unfair side because they want you to be like, oh, this guy's a god, and
This guy's
you're
a final
literally
boss.
fighting something you shouldn't be fighting. And it did feel
Right.
that way. It did feel that
It
way.
did.
So
It very much did.
yeah, anyway, what do you think
Yeah,
about Radon?
so it was spoiled for me too, but only in word. I saw a clip or a thumbnail or something about final boss Radon or something, and I was like, "What the heck?" At first, I was like, "Is that can't be right?" And
Doesn't
then
sound right.
I was like, "Okay," I accepted. I went through the stages of grief,
Right.
um,
Right.
but I was just like, "That's so weird for the final boss of Erdtree to be something about Radon." Like, I'm not too keen on the lore. I get that it probably makes sense lore wise with Mikula and whatever, but yeah, that's a bummer. I mean, a final boss that looks like Mother of Fingers is just going to be. You want that visual, like, what is that, or this is brand new, and you don't get that
Yeah.
with Radon, even though he is a different design and he's younger. Blah blah blah. That was a bummer. As far as his fight, yeah, I went through various stages. I think his first phase is pretty great. Um,
Mm-hmm.
not too many complaints, but I guess let me boil this down. I have two complaints with the Radon fight because ultimately I found myself very frustrated. It took me quite a while to beat him. Over 100 attempts, which is very rare for me to spend that long on a boss. Um, and so I was very frustrated with a lot of aspects of him, but I was surprised to find that after beating him, giving it a day or two, I I wouldn't hate going back and fighting him. Like, the more you learn, I think he is a good fight. He has great elements. The twin spires in the background. There's just a lot to like here that's very epic. My
Mm-hmm.
two complaints about the fight are basically, first, he has a move. It's in his first phase, and I think it's in his second phase too. But it's where he just very quickly does a swipe and then follows it up with a very quick swipe after that. And so, unless you are in the perfect spot, like right by his leg, there is no way to dodge both of those swipes. They are too quick. And that's bad design to me. Like, something needs to be tough to dodge or tough to get away from, but it needs to be doable. It needs to feel satisfying to do it. This move, I just had to accept that I'll either dodge the first one and get hit by the second one, or I'll get hit by the first one and hopefully dodge the second one if I'm not stun locked. I think it's just a badly designed move. I think if you remove that move entirely, the boss fight is better, or make it so that he only has one swipe instead of two. That move is the biggest problem I have with the fight. The second is his second phase is insanity, and I get that it's supposed to be insanity. It's supposed to be visually intimidating, but to compare it to something like Mesmer's second phase is very visually intimidating. There's a lot going on, and it will get you the first couple times. You won't know what to do or where to go because you'll be just kind of like visually overstimulated and kind of panicking. And that's cool. I like that. But once you calm down in the Mesmer fight, it's very clear where and when to dodge. Very clear and
Yeah.
very satisfying to do so. I think in the Radon fight in the second phase, it is just not visually clear enough to the player what you're supposed to do. Because I fought Radon over 100 times, and I ultimately came to the conclusion I tried to dodge forward with a lot of his stuff, but I was still getting clipped by his follow-up light attacks. And so I just came to the conclusion that doesn't work anymore. I have to be farther away from him, which drug the fight out, kind of made it less
Yeah.
fun. And after beating him, I watched some videos and I see people. Oh, you can, if you stay right under his junk, you can avoid the light aftermath of all of his moves.
Yeah.
But I just
You
don't
just
think
got to
that's
be
clear
in there.
enough. It's not. Yeah, you just got to be up in there. You got to be up in there, Morty. So it's just not clear enough. I think they
Yeah.
needed somehow to convey that to the player better, because it is not clear how to fight him in his second phase. I
Yeah.
also, his light burst
Mikola should
ability,
have appeared and been like, "Go betwixt his
get
legs to avoid
betwixt
thy divine light."
under his junk. Really out of character. Yeah, that I just think it could have been better communicated, because
Yeah.
if there was a way that visually it was like, oh, I need to be up close, I think the fight would have been a lot better in the second phase. Um, his giant burst nova that he does, I think, is also a bad move. I think it needs to be a little
Hmm.
smaller, because that move in particular, if you are not hauling butt the second it happens,
The
you're gonna get hit.
millisecond. I
Yeah,
almost
and even
never
if
was
you
able to
are,
dodge that.
yeah, and that feels bad. That's
Yeah.
bad move design, because as a player, I eventually got to the point where I was like, dude, I'm gonna pull out this dinky little weapon I have that negates like 65% holy damage, and I'm just gonna take it, because
Yeah.
I got so tired of sprinting a half mile and still
Yeah.
getting hit every time. It just
Yeah.
feels
I have the
bad.
same.
A
Yeah.
good example of, like, I think a good move that he has that feels satisfying to dodge yet requires good reflexes is his gravity well move, where he goes to pull you in.
Hmm.
That move is so good, because if you're not paying attention, it'll get you every time. But if you are paying attention, there's just enough time to react and dodge, and it feels really satisfying to do that and negate his entire gravity move set.
Yeah.
Um, More things needed to be tuned like
Whereas
that, I
the
think.
light burst felt like even if you're paying attention, you more often got punished, even
Exactly.
if you reacted quickly. And I totally agree with that one. Yeah.
So those are my main critiques. I think if you fix those two and a half, 3 issues, this is an incredible boss fight. I still think it's an incredible boss fight. I just think it has some issues, and especially for the new player, a player who's not watching a video, I think
Hmm.
it becomes more frustrating than it needed to be.
Yeah, that's a
Difficulty
good way to
shouldn't be
put it.
frustrating; it should be satisfying. And he has a couple things that tweak him over to the frustrating side of things, I think. So.
That's a really good way to put it. I'd agree with that because I still think he was cool. I still liked the boss fight, and now that I've had 4 or 5 days since I beat it, or 3 or 4 days since I beat it, to kind of sit with it, I liked the boss fight. I think it's very memorable, and it was still satisfying to finish, but it had more frustrating elements than many of the other bosses. And I get it; they're trying to
Yeah.
make him really hard, and he was really hard. So, and I will say, having beat him and beat the DLC, I feel so accomplished. Like It's kind of the classic meme where you're like at a party or at the grocery store and the character is like looking around. It's like, they don't even know I'm the Elden Lord. Like, no one realizes the
No one
accomplishment you
knows what I've
have.
been through.
No one knows that I've done this. So good stuff.
It's
So
true.
we've talked.
It's such a hard balance they have to strike these days because we're all better at the games.
Yeah.
They've given us too many tools. I think they need to pare back the tools. I would say would be my recommendation. But it's man, I don't envy the position. It's hard to create a boss that is just difficult enough that you really feel that satisfaction when you beat it, but
Yeah.
not poorly designed or overly frustrating. So
Well, and
it's
part
a
of that
tough
comes back to
balance. I
the,
do. Go ahead.
I was just say part of that comes back to the open world and some of the tools they already gave you, like spirit
Hmm.
summons, and then there are kind of like special
Yeah,
character
I would
summons
love
you
to
can
see
get.
those go away,
There are times when I like them, but I also feel like if they were designed without them, the game could be as good as it is, and
or
in
just you
some ways
can't take
better.
them into boss fights. Maybe I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, although I think they're, yeah, I mean, because
I think part of their problem though is that they lack rewards for the open world, and this was one of their
yeah,
solutions.
and this was a good
And
it
we
was
gotta
a,
find something else.
there needs
You
to
know,
be
I
some,
don't
I
know.
don't know what it is,
There
but
needs to be more
um
cosmetic options for things, maybe not just armor sets, but like
yeah,
changes to the armor sets, things
more
like that. Because
different mounts is an option. You got
different
torrent. Can
mounts,
you
yeah. Why
get,
do we not
I
have
know you
more?
are
Yeah,
on PC, you're
exactly.
modding the heck out of your mounts. I'm playing on PS5
Yeah,
like a plebeian,
playing an
unable
ultra
to.
wide with a
Yeah,
white torrent with electric hooves.
yeah.
Yeah,
See, I'm just a, just a gutter rat with my normal horse. Like,
that's what
so
you
there's,
get for burning your PC up.
I know there's some things that they could probably do, but I think because of those tools they'd established, which I've had fun with, there are times when I've enjoyed Spirit Ashes for sure, but because of all these things they've given you, they're like, okay, for this to be really hard, they have to tune it in a way that can handle these things too. And so then if you're a purist and you're like, well, I want to fight this without Spirit Ashes, it's that much harder.
Yeah, it's just not
But
fun.
we've talked about that before. But
I will say,
overall,
I didn't think about it, but I did not ring the Spirit Ashes bell once in the entire DLC, and not even
wow.
like super intentionally. I almost did on the Dancing Lion, but then I realized there was an NPC summon, and that was early
Mm.
enough that I was like, "Oh, this is kind of story related. I want to bring him in," and that's what I did there. But yeah, I didn't use the Spirit Ashes one time in the whole DLC, which is I think a testament to I think it being better designed than the base game.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Any
So
closing
level,
thoughts on Erdtree?
I think so. Level design and bosses, those are kind of the big things. Yeah, I think my closing thoughts are just that this was a phenomenal experience. I loved it. It's the one we've talked about. The one last disappointing thing is that if I ever want to replay the DLC, I need a character who can access it. And so it's like there's so
Ah,
much
yeah, that's
investment
totally true.
in Elden Ring that it's like if I'm not in the mood to play the base, I could see myself being like, I don't feel like the base game right now, but I want to replay some DLC. But it's like,
Yes,
okay, well, you have to
100%.
go through 70% of the base game to do it. And that's a little frustrating. I would love, like, there's maybe even the solution of like,
Them to separate it
once
a
I
little or
beat it, give
something.
me the option to just start at a certain level in at the Erdtree DLC, and I can like
Yep.
basically a new character creation at a certain level, so that I can then just experience the DLC. Because I want to come back and play it again. I don't know that I'm always going to want to have to replay the entirety of Elden
Agreed.
Ring to do this.
Yep.
So that's one
We
last thing.
talked about this where I was just like, I wish that they could separate this not only for new players because I feel like this is worth experiencing regardless of if you want to play Elden Ring or not,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
but
agree.
for players who want to play it again, like I will actively not look forward to replaying the base game to get to the DLC. That feels like such a chore.
Yeah,
And even now, like, where I'm at now, I've beaten the DLC. If I want to restart the DLC, I have to go beat Elden Ring and then do all the stuff to get to Mohg's Palace again in the main game just to get back to the beginning of the DLC. That's a major mark. That is a real bummer because there's no
yeah,
easy way to replay the DLC. So
yeah. So I hope they give
that
us like a
sucks.
shortcut.
I kind of wish they could have separated a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know what you do
Like I
about
said,
that.
they got it. Well, what I said, I think, is the easy solution is once you've beat the DLC for the first time. Well, I guess that's still for the first time, but give me the option to at least
Sure,
replay it
after one,
without
that would
doing
be
it.
nice.
It'd be something,
Start New
but
Game Plus in Shadow of the Erdtree, something like that.
something.
Or like
So
just make it so that you can access once you've beaten Erdtree, you can access it from the first check bonfire. What are they called? Thing of light.
yeah, side of grace. Yeah. So I mean,
Interesting.
just despite all its flaws, it's hard to not rate this a 10 out of 10. Like it's like technically, I could say, oh yeah, it's a 9.5 or whatever, because there are a few things that I could hold against it. But the sum of its parts is so great that it's like,
Yeah,
this
I
is in there
agree.
with all of the, I mean, nothing's perfect, right? So it's like one of those things where it's like, for all intents and purposes, this is pretty much perfect. And this is going to be up there. And I think when I rank my top 10 games, like this is probably going to be in my top five. Um,
Yeah.
it's great. I loved
Yeah.
it.
Elden Ring was not in competition with Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro for me. And now with Shadow of the Erdtree, I'm going to have a headache trying to rank those three
Same.
in whatever
Yeah.
order in my top 10, top 5 games. So, one last thing I want to say about Erdtree before we move on PC, the ability to mod is great. And one mod that I added about halfway through the DLC was I removed the upgrade requirements for weapons because I couldn't be bothered to go find all these stones I was missing. And they give you so many weapons that you want to try. I really think that I get that the diversity is supposed to be for different playthroughs, but I really think the game would greatly benefit from removing some of these restrictions on weapons, um, allowing you to pick up something and not feel like you can't use it because of the investment. You can't invest in it right now. It's just I get that stats matter. Endurance or I'm sorry, dexterity, strength. Keep all that. That's fine, but remove some of these huge barriers to upgrading these weapons to making them relevant. Because I had such a better time when it was like, oh, you know what, this weapon's sick. Let me upgrade this. I want to try this out for a little while. Like
Interesting. Yeah.
the game is
I feel like
better.
they addressed it somewhat, because a lot of the items you'll find are smithing stones in this DLC,
But I
almost
still
comically
found I
so.
was missing, a 2 or a 6 all the time, and it just was frustrating. I'm
Yeah,
like, I don't
it's
want to go
annoying.
hunt these down.
It isn't, well, what I found is in the base game you can get these bell bearings to like buy them,
Right.
and so when I had already done that, and so
Oh,
most of the
okay.
ones I was
Because I
missing I
looked
would
into
just
it and
go
I'm like,
buy
I don't
them.
want to bother. I don't want to spend 2 hours finding all these bell bearings.
Yeah,
So, you
which
know,
is honestly fair, I think. But there is a path. Like if you the bell bearings, none of them were that. If you here's the thing, it kind of relies on you having played the base game. I played 90% of the base game before
for
starting
sure.
the DLC, and so I had done this stuff. I had all my sites of grace. It was easy to go drop in, find this bell bearing, come
Yeah.
back. And so when I
I
would
do
get to
think
the
that's
point with a
another
weapon, and
thing where once you've found the bell bearings, I think they should persist through playthroughs. Because I'm
yeah,
on a new game plus. I found all of them in the original game, but now I'm on
yeah,
new game plus and I have none of them. And it's
you have
just
all your
like it's just
armor.
annoying.
It
Just
is. You have all
annoying.
your armor. I don't need to do this again. I agree with that. So yeah,
Anyways,
I'm
there's
not
my
just
2 cents.
yeah,
Get
I
rid
don't
of it.
disagree with
I think
that. I don't
weapons are
disagree
more
with it
fun to when you can use a bunch of them and not worry about it. So,
totally.
um, okay, there's Shadow of the Erdtree. I mean, we could honestly continue, but we have
Yeah.
to talk about these other games that I played. What did you play? Anything else? You bring in anything else, or
Um,
are you
I
going to
mean,
interview me on these games?
I'm mostly going to interview you. I played a little bit of Tears of the Kingdom on the side. I'm trying to make my way through that because I
You
love
think you'll
that game,
get
and
back to it?
I've been working on it. I've been playing a couple nights a
Yeah.
week, like
Oh,
small
okay. Cool.
increments,
Cool.
but it's kind of when I'm like not at my TV. I've been playing small increments of it. So that game's amazing, and I'm already like halfway through it. It's more of just like, okay, I want to explore, fill out the map, finish stuff, and then finish the bosses and dungeons and finish the game. But the way
Finish
I
the
like to
story.
approach,
Yeah, for
I want
sure.
to finish the story, but the way I approach these Zelda games is like, I hate to like rush through the story just to experience that and leave all this open world. Like I like to experience a lot of it along the way. It feels like a more natural adventure.
Yeah, I mean that's how
So
they're meant to be played. Just don't miss the
so
story. That's all. Like play it
oh
however
yeah,
you want, but
yeah,
finish the story because it is unlike Breath of the Wild. It is worth finishing.
yeah. So I
Um,
will. I don't know how long it'll take me
God,
because it's
some
kind of,
epic moments in that game.
yeah, but it's good. That's the
I've
only
been
other thing I've
I
been playing.
I've been dabbling too because it's just the call to go back there. I never finished exploring everything. Obviously, the map is huge, so I still have some sky islands and things to do, and I'm like wanting to get back. I have the itch. I have the itch.
Yeah.
Um, but unfortunately, I cannot scratch the itch because I've been playing other things. I played. I started Remnant One years ago, and just recently I was like, you know what, Remnant Two is so good. I kind of have a minute here. I popped back in and I finished Remnant One, and good game. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. If you like Remnant 2, Remnant 1 is worth playing. I think Remnant 2 is a better game. They've kind of perfected what Remnant 1 is. But I was expecting Remnant 1 to be a bit more of a prototype of Remnant 2, and I got to say Remnant 1 is 80% of what Remnant 2 is. Like it was all there. It was all there from the first game. I think it's underrated, and if you if you like Dark Souls, if you like Souls-like games, and you haven't checked out Remnant, play Remnant 2. It's phenomenal. And then also Remnant 1 is worth your time. So that's all I really have to say about that.
Nice.
Um,
I need
it's
to try
good.
that at some point.
It really is Dark Souls. People say it's Dark Souls with guns. It really is. Like
That's a
it's
good
that
pitch.
good.
Yeah.
It works, and it works really well. So finished that up. Played, also jumped back into Grime for the DLC. That came out
I
as a
love
free
Grime.
DLC that came out a year or two ago.
Hmm.
And we played Grime, man, what do you think, 4 or 5 years ago?
No, it wasn't that long. It
4
was
years
2 to 3 years ago.
You think it was that recent?
It was no more. I think it was
I don't
three
know
at
how
the
to count
most.
time.
I was in this house, and I've only been in this house for 3 years.
Okay.
So,
All right. Well,
but
anyways, we
still,
played
it's been probably about
Grime.
three
We
years.
both liked it. Good Metroidvania, really well made, very unique, kind of weird.
Hmm.
I think the combat in Grime is probably some of the best in any Metroidvania.
Yeah,
Really
the
kind of
combat's
borrows
great.
that Sekiro, like rock, paper, scissors. If this enemy does this, I have to do this instead of just dodge rolling through everything. And it works really well. So I played through the DLC, which, first thought, people, make your DLCs easy to figure out. Like when I haven't been in your game in 2 years and I'm just like on all these forums and Reddit trying to figure out, okay, what is in this DLC? How do I get to this DLC? And it's
Hmm.
not clear. Very frustrating. I spent at least an hour just trying to figure out, like, what is this DLC and where do I go? Because I had my save, thankfully, of the full game completed, but I could not figure out like what, there needs to be, just go to the resting point, the bonfire, whatever, and just like teleport me to the start of the DLC or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Make this easy, people. Anyways, I found it. It ended up being just kind of like a new area with a couple new boss fights. It was nothing major. In my opinion, all it does is just kind of takes the game and does this, you know, kind of fills it
Hmm.
out a little bit more. If you haven't played Grime, now it's a little bit fuller. It has a brand new area with some new boss
Nice.
fights. But I will say it was nice to jump back in. It reminded me how good it is.
I
The
really
boss
like
fights
Grime.
felt really satisfying and fun. I maybe
Hmm.
spent an hour or two in this DLC, but it was just a nice little, like, dip my toes back into Grime, which sounds really gross, but it was like a spa Grime, it was like
Yeah.
rejuvenating Grime.
Yeah.
And it has me excited for Grime 2, which is announced. I don't think we have a date for this year, but maybe next year we'll get Grime 2, and
Is
that'll
it
be fun.
so? I loved the first Grime. Is it worth replaying? Because at this point, I'd have to replay it. I think. Is it worth replaying Grime for the DLC or?
No,
Uh,
no, I would say no.
okay, good to know.
That's what I was trying to convey with, like,
Yeah,
it just fills out the world. It gives you a new area.
but it's not like Erdtree, where it's
But
like
the thing
this
is,
is its
you
own.
wouldn't have to replay the entire game. You could
Yeah,
access the DLC pretty quickly because it's just kind of connected to the world.
yeah.
Um,
If my PC was
but no,
working, that is.
I would not actively replay Grime unless you're just like, man, I
Yeah,
want to play some Grime. Then there's some new content for you.
yeah, yeah.
What
Nice.
else did I do? Um, okay, I've got some other quick hitters before we get to the meat of other things I played. Played a Genshin update for summer, which was pretty solid, actually. It was weird. You like are going into this toy world where everything is like, it's like fairy tale Toy Story almost. Um, I don't know. I had fun with it. Genshin is Genshin. I don't play it much anymore, but I actually enjoyed hopping in for the summer events. They do kind of some fun stuff for the summer usually.
Hmm.
Still playing a lot of Wuthering Waves, enjoying that. Um, and then as for the two other main games that I played, let's start with Stellar Blade because we've talked about it. I just want to discuss a little bit because now we can get into spoilers. I have finished the game at Zach's request, at his encouragement, to
Insistence. Yeah,
insi- at threat of death from Zach. I finished the game. Um, got through the putrid middle section open zone areas, and I got to say that the final, like, 3 to 4 hours, you're ascending the spire, and things get super. They go from like ugly desert to like awesome sci-fi alien stuff happening, and it's just super cool. The final hours
yeah,
of this game are absolutely worth experiencing. It's a bit of a boss gauntlet as well, which is when Stellar Blade is at its best, and I think
yeah,
these closing bosses are actually some of the best in the entire game.
yeah,
Visually, very unique. I mean, there's one that's super like, what Ghost of Tsushima meets Bloodborne, like just this super deranged kind of Eastern
Yeah.
inspired
Creepy
samurai blob,
masks. Like,
creepy
yeah.
masks in a
Yeah.
room with like a, well, what are those pink trees
Cherry
called? The
blossoms.
cherry
Yeah.
blossom tree. And it's just, and you're in the middle of
Beautiful.
a
It's
space
great.
station.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
so
freaking
good.
cool.
It's really cool.
Freaking cool.
Yeah.
You get to the top, there's this like super, again, we say this all the time, but this bloodborne blob with like a giant
Cosmic
sword and
horror beast.
cosmic
Yeah.
horror beast that you're fighting. And then that moment at the end, you fight that, and then the one of the, what are they called, elder nativas, is basically leeching the entire space station you get to.
Hmm.
And you have this almost dead space moment where you get ejected into space, and you have to, there's not much to it mechanically, but it was very satisfying.
It
You
was very
pull out
cool.
your
Yeah.
giant gun, and you're like dead space shooting at this giant creature that's just like leached onto the space station as you fall
Yeah.
back to earth. Like there's just some epic stuff happening at the end of this game. I thought the conclusion was actually pretty satisfying. People crap on the story a lot, but I thought the whole
I
thing
liked
with
the ending.
Adam,
Yeah.
I thought the whole thing with Adam was, I mean, obviously something was happening with Adam that was super predictable. You're like, okay, he's a bad guy. But I thought they did a good job at the end of like, he's not really the bad guy. Like,
Hmm.
they did a good job of that. He's a villain that you can kind of relate to. You're like, oh, I
You
get it.
understand what
And
he's
there's
trying to
there's a
do. Yeah.
choice. There's a choice to make at the end that actually kind of makes you go, huh, I feel like the right choice is actually counter to what I've been doing this entire time, you know?
Yeah.
Um, you didn't get to face that boss fight, which there's two bosses depending on what choice you make. I did end up getting the platinum because I'm stupid, but it wasn't too bad. It wasn't
You
too bad.
finished the fishing trophy too. Yeah.
I did. I had done so much groundwork that I was too invested at this point. I was like, let me just get this. But my recommendation to anyone looking at Stellar Blade is, unless you feel compelled and you just love this world and you want to do all the terrible, boring side quests, do not. Like, just main
Yeah.
path this game,
I
and you
gave
will
up
have
on
a
it
much better
on the
time.
platinum at least. Yeah.
You will enjoy it so much better if you're point A to point B, going to
Yeah.
these bosses, progressing the story. So,
And it's worth it. Like if
um,
you do that, you get through some of the, you don't have to do all the boring stuff, and you get to experience the highs of this game are very high, and it's worth. In that last, like you said, that last sequence where you scale, you go up like the giant elevator from the surface of the earth into the atmosphere to the space station, just that whole gauntlet and the boss fights, and then up until you have the decision to make, and with Adam and the Elder Natiba and stuff. Really good, really really good. I think Stellar Blade is
agreed.
um maybe a little underrated at this point. Like, I maybe properly rated. I feel like a
I think
lot of
it's
people
about
are
right.
singing its praises. And it's not perfect. It's not like a top tier game, but for a first game from a studio, and some of the things they do super well, they do well enough that
Hmm.
it's like I'm excited to see what they do next. I'd be excited for a sequel, and I think if you like action RPGs, if you like some of the Souls combat, if you like really cool epic bosses and like sci-fi cosmic stuff, you really should play through this.
Agreed. Another few quick thoughts after finishing. The music is great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it did get on my nerves. It's a little omnipresent. I ended up turning the volume on the music down to more of a background sound, and that helped a lot because, man, when I was running around the desert, that song just constantly playing,
Yeah.
it can get on your nerves a little bit. So maybe turn the music down, but the music is great. So there is that. And then the combat. I both love the combat and think it really needs some work because they end up giving you, it's kind of similar to the FromSoft Elden Ring problem, but they give you too many tools. I think if they had just focused their parry system and their base combat is really really good, and they kind of lean too heavily into the flashy action side of things by giving you like two meters that you can fill up to do two different sets
Two
of like
separate
super
attack
abilities.
wheels. Yeah, so it's like
Yeah,
eight different. Each of those has four unique abilities. So it's like you have eight special attack abilities
that
with
are
two
almost at
separate
your beck and
meters
call all of the time.
between. Well,
And
and then you
then
have like a supercharge ability too,
exact
right?
that's the other thing is if you push L3 and R3, you go into a Spartan rage mode and you have like a
Yeah,
third, even
yeah,
more powerful super. And so what it ultimately comes down to is at the end of the game, your basic attacks start doing such little damage that it kind of pushes you into just spamming these abilities. You're just like,
yeah,
all right, let me do this set of abilities. Let me do this set of abilities. Let me do my tacky mode, which is your L3 R3 super. And ultimately it just kind of has that problem of it can very easily devolve into you not having to learn bosses as much because you can just spam these abilities and stun lock them.
Yeah, and cycle through them.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and that's a bummer because I think their boss design is really good, and I think their base combat is really good. So honestly, if I were to replay this game, which I probably will never do, but if I were to recommend to someone who likes more of a Souls-like combat, that satisfying challenge, as opposed to a more Devil May Cry flashy, which I know there's challenge in Devil May Cry too, but um, I would say maybe shelve the abilities for the most part. Use them on like mobs and stuff, but for boss fights, just parry and fight. I
Yeah.
think you'll have a much more satisfying time with the bosses if you do that.
Yeah. And I think if they ever made a sequel, I would love if they maybe drop one of the
Yeah,
meters
let's get rid of some.
entirely.
Let's get it simplified
Keep
a little bit.
keep the 1 meter with the 4 abilities, but maybe what you do is do more of a rock paper scissors thing where it's like some of these different abilities are meant for certain circumstances. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, oh, this person has a special energy shield, and this will help me like deactivate that so that we can go back about our
yeah.
dance, or like the type of,
And then you
make it
factor that
rock
in
paper
with the other
scissors.
things. With the other things they already do well in that aspect, where like the enemy does certain attacks that you have to dodge through and then do a
Right.
counterattack, or an attack where you have to dodge back. They
Yeah, it
do
already
so
does that
many
well.
things
Yeah.
well. The combat's already doing so many things well. We don't need like 18 different super abilities. It just
I agree
kind
with
of
that. I didn't use those
it
super
washes
often
out
for that
everything that
reason.
they did so well. So there's my thoughts on it. I think it has 9 out of 10 moments, and I think it has 6 out of 10 moments, and it
Yeah.
ultimately
It makes it hard to
ends
rank
up
because it's
being
like,
7.58 out of 10 probably. And I
yeah,
think you'll get more of the 9 out of 10 experience if you kind of book it through the story. So
right. Yep. 100% agree. I'm glad you experienced it, and it's exciting to have a new game from a new developer that is doing some of these things. So it's cool.
yeah, I'm excited to see what they do next. Not like Lies of P excited, but I'm excited. So
Yeah.
the last game that I played this month is I managed to get myself pulled into a backlog game, Metroidvania. It's called After Image. It's what I've had for sitting around in my Steam library for a little while. And yeah, I booted it up one day. It has full ultra wide support, which is fun for me
It's
because
always
I've got
nice.
this fancy ultra wide monitor, and so that's nice. And what's the other thing? It runs great on Steam Deck. It's just a the first thing I'll say about this game is it is a beautiful looking game. The art style is pretty phenomenal. Just every scene, all the background, the backdrops are just this is a great game to look at. If you have a 4K situation or an OLED, like this game will pop off. Um, Visually fantastic, but on the same side of that coin, it kind of lacks atmosphere. And I'm not sure if this is a me thing, but like this specific art style, if you're looking at it or look it up, it's very similar to like a Ender Lilies art style, which I don't know how better to describe than it almost has this like Paper Mario paper art style
Yeah,
where
I
like
could see
things are
that.
3D esque, 2.5D, but there's a lot of 2D looking elements. I don't know. It's very weird. And to me, as beautiful as the game looks, I don't love that art style because it ends up feeling kind of lifeless to me. Lifeless, atmosphereless, not atmospheric. I don't know if you can
Yeah,
relate to that at all, but it's just this little thing where I can't get immersed in this world the same way I can a Hollow Knight, and I think it really comes down to art style. A lot of it. There
interesting.
may be
Yeah,
other factors, but combat wise, combat is solid, never great, and unfortunately, like too many Metroidvanias, too many games. Honestly, the combat gets its best too late in the game. I
mm,
think, and Hollow Knight kind of has this problem too. Now that I'm thinking back to it, my immediate frustration was you can't dodge through enemies. You will take
yeah,
contact damage, and contact damage can be very frustrating. But I think where it really is more of a problem in this game is because your character is not this tight little, you know, being running around where you can really
yeah,
control and get in. You're kind of a bigger character and a little bit less tight control, and so the contact damage can be very frustrating because you feel
hmm,
like you don't have the tools really to avoid some of it, and you don't get your dash through enemies ability till much later in the game. um, that said, though, large variety of enemies, large variety of boss fights, huge game. This game took me, I mean, good grief. I think my playtime is 35 hours on this. It's a huge Metroidvania that just keeps going. So from
Yeah,
that standpoint, that could be good or bad. Um, but the like I said, the enemy variety, it even has like a bestiary where you can see all the enemies. This game could turn this into a creature capture game. Like there's just so many enemies, and the art on them is so good. Like
that's
it's
cool.
I want to draw half of these. They're so
No,
cool.
that's always a good sign.
Um, yeah, one of the things it does best, I would say, is the enemy design and the art style on them. Um, the biggest critique I have of this game, man, I had a hard time with this game because like early on, I was like, why are not more people talking about Afterimage? This is a stellar game, like just great art style. They're just nailing it. But man, it's a long game. It kind of drags on. But the biggest problem I have is that the story and the direction of where to go is just not communicated very well. Like the story is nonsense. It's very hard to follow. None of it makes sense. They're throwing out all these words and it's just kind of like what is happening really at the end of the day. And then secondly, there were a lot of times where also when it came to direction, it was just like, man, I feel like I don't know where to explore next. Like I'm kind of stuck in every direction. Um, there needed to be better cues as far as where to go and in what order. I think I did a lot of things in a weird order because I missed like one thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I ended up fighting certain areas that were like much higher level than me. And it was fun for a challenge, but then I beat that area and I'm like, I still don't know where to go. It took me a while to, anyways, I just feel like that all could have been better communicated and it kind of drags the experience down in the end to a lesser, not a phenomenal, like a
Right.
phenomenal. Again, it's like a 9 out of 10 in some areas, with a 6 out of 10 in some areas.
Yeah.
It's just so rare that a game can do everything perfect the way Hollow Knight or some of these other games do. So,
Yeah.
um, you have any questions about Afterimage? I'm trying to think my way through
No,
my
I feel like what you've
experience here.
described is, yeah, understandable. It looked cool. I looked at some of the art from it. It does look like a more vibrant Ender Lilies. Um, and that the thing that intrigued me most was all the cool creatures and then like uh, to the point where you would like a creature capture element. That makes me want to play it just to see what all the creatures look like. Um,
Yeah,
but
it's so
it's
good, man.
tough. It's tough when game. I feel like, and it makes sense. Like I feel like it's hard to expect a lot of games to be Hollow Knight level like nines and tens across every facet of the game. Like obviously that's not always going to be possible. Um, but it can be kind of hard
Yeah,
to like rank and rate a game where you're like, well, certain moments were like nines out of 10, but other moments were just really dreary or bad or confusing. And it's like, but the game doesn't feel like a seven
yeah,
necessarily. You know what I mean? Like it makes it kind of hard to do some of that, but
and it's
it
tough
sounds
because
cool. Like,
ultimately, I think the negatives tend to outweigh positives more often than not in games because games are
yeah,
so time consuming and they're just a different medium in that way where it's like you can love two or three aspects of a game, but if two or three aspects are bad, it
it's a lot to put
at the
up
end of the
with.
day, it's just like, man, it wasn't that great to play because they're so impactful. And I went through this range of emotions where like after image, I'm like, this is a top 5 Metroidvania like I've ever played. This is so good. The studio is just hitting it out of the park. And then by the end of it, I was just like, it was just taxing enough and long-winded enough and convoluted enough that it's going to fall down the rankings because of those reasons. I wouldn't want to replay it. I would recommend it if you like the Metroidvania genre. If you're one who plays a lot of these games, this game has a lot to like. Like it is a good Metroidvania, especially if you manage to go the right direction and not get lost. I think you'll have a slightly better time. Um, but yeah, that's where I landed with it. I don't really know. I would give it I'd give it an 8 out of 10 with some caveats, 7.5 out of 10. It's so great to look at, and it runs so well, and it has so many things going really well that it's hard to not give it at least an 8.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's what I ended up playing, kind of my
That's cool.
wildfire game as I was running
I
around.
Yeah, if I can if I can your wildfire game. If I can find it on sale, I might pick it up at some point because it
Yeah, I
sounds
would
up my
say
alley.
for you'll never play it, and you probably shouldn't. Like
I love Metroidvanias. I love games I can take on my Steam Deck. I love the like beautiful
all right,
aspect
you
of
can
it.
play it after you
I
play
love creature.
Ultros.
I know. I love creatures, like good creatures. So those are big selling points for me. But yeah, I have a lot to get like Ultros. I need to finish Tears of the Kingdom. I need to finish Star Wars Jedi Survivor and Forbidden West, and I have a lot to get through. So
Yeah, I would put it down on the list for sure. So
yeah.
one of those games. It's one of those games. I think you probably have less of these, but I think we all have a game where we play it, we enjoy our time with it, but at the end of the day, you're just like, I could have also not played that game.
Yeah, I've had those experiences for sure.
It's not a must play. There's a big difference. There's a defining difference between a game you finish and you're like, that is a must play. Dude, you should play this. You person, I don't know, you should play this.
Go play this.
And then you get out of a game where you're just like, there was nothing. That was good. That was fun. But
yeah,
I could also have,
not
educated myself or done something more productive with that time. Maybe,
right,
who knows?
Right. Yeah.
Played more Tears of the Kingdom, honestly, play more Erdtree.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. There's August about July. Yeah. Is that everything?
That's everything I played.
Our spoiler thoughts mostly on Stellar Blade.
Yeah.
You will not have to hear about Stellar Blade from us anymore. What is it? 3 months in a row? A little bit. Erdtree too. I think we talked about a little bit last month. So
yeah,
we finally wrapped up some games here. I think we're all ready to start some new stuff here in August. So that'll wrap it up for us here. Thank you for joining us for this August about July podcast, and hopefully we'll see you next month.